topic is self-efficacy, time stress, and performance. Now, my research question is, to what extent does high school students' self-efficacy impact their performance under time stress? We'll get more into that in a moment. For now, how did I get here? What led me to choose this interesting topic? Well, what ended up happening is that I took an introductory research course last year, and we were doing an assignment studying the effects of procrastination on students. And my teacher said something unique. My teacher said that under time stress, the feeling of being rushed as a result of a time constraint, she felt as though she does well and performs better. And she would look something like this. Well, students in the class agreed that we look something like this under time stress. So we wondered, at least I wondered, why does such a broad spectrum exist in performance under time stress? There has to be an underlying factor. And there was an underlying factor: self-efficacy, the belief in your own ability to perform and achieve a specific task or goal. And the previous literature actually supports this gap that I found. For starters, Barrows et al. In a paper, Anxiety, Self-Efficacy, and College Exam Grades, found that higher self-efficacy improves examination performance. However, he failed to address whether varying the amount of time has that same correlation. Sure, we know that self-efficacy is correlated with better exam performance, but what happens when the exam is way more stressful? There's less time. What then? Additionally, DePaul and Gioia, in Who Performs Better Under Time Pressure, a paper, found that males perform better than females under time stress. And that's interesting. But the main interesting part about this is why. They theorized that the only difference between the two genders, confidence levels. And that led me to my research. To what extent does high school students' self-efficacy impact their performance under time stress? Because we know a lot about self-efficacy, we know a lot about time stress, and we know theories sparking a debate between the two, but there was no full study from what I found to combine those two topics into one. So what I believe will happen is that students with higher self-efficacy will perform better under time stress. And that's because the positive influences of self-efficacy, the more confidence you have, the better belief in yourself, will probably combat those negative thoughts that come from time stress, the feeling of being rushed. It should combat that. But how did I do this? I chose a quantitative methodology, and I chose it for 3 factors. Number 1, numbers. We're using numerical data here. We're using the survey questions, we're using assessments, we're using those numbers. And I'm analyzing those numbers through statistical measures, t-tests. So that's why I chose quantitative method. But how did I design this experiment? How did I magically come up with this research and design it so sophisticatedly? 5 steps. Step 1, how can I measure self-efficacy? Now, my original intention was to ask students, how confident are you on this assessment from a scale of 1 to 10? I found out in previous literature that that probably wouldn't work. And it wouldn't work for one major reason. As found by Tolsma et al., students lie. They don't want others to judge them based on their self-efficacy. And they don't want to jinx themselves on performing, so they don't tell the truth. So I looked for an alternative: surveys. Surveys, specifically the General Self-Efficacy Scale by Schwarzer and Jerusalem, would be my best bet, because there's a lot of reliable evidence that shows how beneficial this survey is to be implemented, and there's little criticism online about this survey. So step 2, how am I going to assess performance? I was stuck between 2, arithmetic or English. Originally, a lot of previous sources used arithmetic, like simple addition, subtraction, multiplication, in order to, well, measure how well you do in an exam. And I was originally going with that. But I remember I'm looking not just at time stress, I'm looking at self-efficacy. So I chose the state test 2016 and 17, the English assessment, because English allows for those with lower self-efficacy to have more doubt in their mind. Even if it's the simplest question, if you're reading under time stress, you're wasting time thinking, is it A or is it B? Those with higher confidence will know it's A. It's a simple task. But when you see that clock ticking, those with lower confidence are going to be stressed out. And that will cause a difference, which is why I chose English. In math, the only way you're really getting something wrong, you're not going to get 2 + 2 = 4 wrong because you don't know. You're going to get it wrong because you don't have time. And I don't want to rush students. I just want to add a simulated time pressure. So how do I select participants? I chose the research program as my way to get participants, and I chose it for two major reasons. Firstly, it's convenient. This program at my school allows for me to get participants, a lot of participants, because they get credit for helping others in research. Additionally, they have a scale from 1 to 100, which each credit being equivalent to their grade on the actual report card. Therefore, I could give varying amounts of credit, 2 to 10 points, which would incentivize people firstly to participate, to get the grade, but secondly, it would incentivize people to try. And that's the main important factor. I want kids to try in this assessment. So, I would send out a consent form with a little experimental blurb explaining what I'm doing. They'd send it back to me signed, and I would schedule them to come in on day 1 and day 2, leading to conducting of the experiment. Day 1, time stress, 9 minutes on the clock, they finish the assessment. Day 2, untimed, pretty much full period on the clock, they finish the assessment. And step 5, analyzing the data, specifically through a t-test. First, t-test number 1, under time stress. See a lot of data here? The main important factors, the main important details is the t-stat and the t-critical two-tail. The t-stat is greater than the t-critical two-tail, and what that means is there's a significant difference between high self-efficacy and low self-efficacy's performance. Meaning that 66% over there on the mean, variable 1, that's how good people scored in the high self-efficacy group under time stress. That's the average. Variable 2, they scored a 56% on time stress, the low self-efficacy group. So the higher self-efficacy group is significantly better than the low self-efficacy group. However, under no time stress, there was no correlation found. There was no significant difference found. And what does that mean? Well, it means to what extent does high school students' self-efficacy impact their performance under time stress to a lower extent. And it's because it shows that high self-efficacy students, those with more confidence in themselves, perform better under time stress. We provide evidence for that. And it makes sense too. Those with high self-efficacy are able to combat the negative thoughts, focus on the assessment, and they score high. Those with low self-efficacy are stressing, they're thinking of their failure, they're thinking of how much stakes are on this test, they're stressing, they're guessing their multiple choice, and that results in a lower grade. So, we figured that out, but how does that help the future of research? Our implications. It helps in a major way, classroom improvements. More specifically, 2 major ways to do so, self-efficacy policies and the reduction of time stress. Number 1, self-efficacy policies. Firstly, we know that higher self-efficacy correlated with better performance. So that's really good. Let's try to improve self-efficacy policies. So Baltimore Affleck et al. Found that by just giving positive feedback to students, increasing the amount of assessments that students get that are less weighted can give people that boost in morale. And that could allow for academic achievement. Additionally, we saw that time stress negatively impacted groups, and it impacted groups unfairly. Lower confidence students are doing worse. So, as found by Gernsbacher, time stress can be reduced. We provide evidence for the debate going on that time stress should be reduced in a classroom. We can reduce it, maybe switching out the assessments, giving more take-home assessment, or using time stress, but for less academically weighted assessments in order to reduce the burden that's on students. But there are limitations with these conclusions. Firstly, we had convenience sampling. While it allowed for me to get enough participants in the limited time that I did have, and it allowed for me to provide different amounts of credit, making people try in the assessment and raising the stakes, it's convenient, meaning I can't really generalize my conclusion to the entire population. And that added to the sample size of just 80 for the entire high school population makes it really hard to generalize said results to said population. So, what's next? How can we improve? What can we build off this research? Future directions. Firstly, redoing this experiment with random sampling as well as more participants would help a lot. It would help a lot because we'd be able to generalize findings to the entire population. Also, experimenting on a younger population. That would be pretty beneficial. We know now that, we know high school students have a high self-efficacy and they improve performance. But we didn't really test it on the younger generation. And by testing and comparing the results, the self-efficacy of younger students to older students, we can find out how schools are helping students build their own confidence. And that could be vital to understanding how academics help students mentally. Also, the analysis of self-efficacy intervention courses. We had courses in the implication section. Our research provided evidence for said courses, like improving self-efficacy through verbal feedback. But how about actually testing if those courses work in a high school setting? We know that they exist, but how about testing them to see if they actually work and boost self-efficacy? That's a future direction. And lastly, we focused on self-efficacy's effect on time stress. But what about the other way around? What about time stress's effect on self-efficacy? Would that have a major impact on students? Will time stress negatively impact confidence? It could really give insights of how the mind works and how one's morale can decrease so significantly by a single assessment. And here are my references.
Thank you. How did your initial exploration of the scholarly conversation lead to your final research question?
So my initial exploration of scholarly conversation did help me to find my research question, because I noticed early on a potential connection between these two topics. Like when I was searching up time stress, I was finding all the negatives, and I was kind of looking for like a solution in a sense. And the Paul and Julia study, which found time stress to unequally affect groups, like males perform better, and they theorized that it might be due to confidence, really dug me into reviewing how self-efficacy works and noticing how there's limited research discussing this topic. So I dug into it, looked at self-efficacy, looked that it could reduce stress. So in that theory, I've created the research question: to what extent does high school students' self-efficacy impact performance under time stress? Because of a possible solution that self-efficacy can have to reduce the amount of tension that students take in time stress scenarios.
And what are some of the real-world implications related to your findings?
So my findings found that self-efficacy improves performance under time stress. And there's a lot of implications that come. Two in particular. Firstly, improving self-efficacy policies and courses. We can boost students' morale as found by Baltimore. We can allow these students to have more courses that, like positive feedback courses. We can also give them more assessments with less academic weight. It gives them that boost in morale that, oh, I'm getting 100, I'm doing really well. And it makes them more confident, and that can benefit academics. And also reduction of time stress. It affects people unequally as seen in the results. And that could benefit students, because if you're reducing time stress and there's less of a burden on certain students, they can perform better academically.
And what was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process?
I would say...
And what was the most important research skill you developed and as a result of this process, and how might you apply it to your future endeavors?
So I feel like the most important research skill that I developed is data analysis. And I say this because I was pretty challenged in how I would go about, like I knew I wanted to do this topic, but I was like confused, like how would I actually analyze the results of this topic? So I decided to research, put in the hours just reviewing different statistical measures. I learned the t-test, the ANOVA, the linear regression, crossover, and that allowed me, firstly, it allowed me to be successful in this class, but for future directions, for the future of me actually, it allows me to improve in two ways. Firstly, in academics, in college courses or AP stats, like experimental psychology is a college course I might want to do. And that could help me out by me understanding how to interpret data that I find as well, like that I collect as well as that other researchers collect. That can help me pass those classes. But also, more importantly, it will allow me to understand like what's important in the real world. Like on the top of my head, I'm thinking there was a recent news report on benzoyl peroxide causing cancer, and being the researcher that I am, I looked into why, and I was looking at the data analysis that they did and the results that they found, and I noticed the only significant cause of cancer, as found in data analysis, was if benzoyl peroxide was in 150-degree weather. And that showed me that, oh, data analysis is very important. I can understand what's fact and what's a clickbait news article fiction.